Welcome to InfoStream, your daily current. Unsure what to listen to? Turn to us for today's headlines. Stay informed. U.S. increases pressure on Venezuela over drug trafficking. The international community and domestic issues are shaping the war. Trade dispute arises between Canada and the United States over Ontario's Advertisement. Queen Sirikit of Thailand dies at 93. Gaza faces critical medical evacuations during the ceasefire. Trump shows interest in reconnecting with Kim Jong-un. Sanctions are imposed on the Colombian president amidst a diplomatic conflict. Rajoelina loses citizenship following Madagascar's coup. Lack of enemy assessment contributed to the China spying case. Drug Kingpin extradited after a dramatic escape. Albinism attacks continue in Tanzania ahead of elections. Rohingya refugee crisis worsens due to funding cuts. Government shutdown impacts expand. Kamala, Harris suggests a second presidential bid. Historical parallel troop deployments like Grover Cleveland's. U.S. intensifies pressure on Venezuela amid drug trafficking concerns. Recent developments reveal a heightened U.S. strategy targeting Venezuela, primarily driven by concerns surrounding drug trafficking and the alleged involvement of President Nicolas Maduro. The United States is deploying significant naval assets, including the Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier strike group, to the Caribbean, signaling a deliberate escalation of pressure on the Maduro regime. This move involves relocating a substantial portion of globally deployed U.S. naval assets to U.S. Southern Command, bolstering military presence in the region. The core of the strategy centers on disrupting transnational criminal organizations and combating narco-terrorism. The U.S. military is utilizing assets such as F-35 fighter jets and MQ-9 Reaper drones in Puerto Rico, establishing a strategic hub for operations. Simultaneously, the U.S. is actively investigating allegations of drug trafficking routes passing through Venezuela, with Maduro himself facing federal indictments related to conspiracy to import cocaine. Despite initial efforts to engage in diplomatic negotiations with Maduro, led by Richard Grenell, these efforts have been suspended. President Trump has expressed willingness to pursue military action against drug traffickers without a formal declaration of war, anticipating minimal resistance. The deployment of the Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group represents a significant commitment of resources. The U.S. is leveraging existing military infrastructure, including the recently reactivated naval station Roosevelt Roads in Puerto Rico, to facilitate operations. While acknowledging the potential need for congressional approval or briefings before undertaking any land-based operations, President Trump remains confident in his ability to proceed. The overall strategy reflects a determination to exert maximum pressure on Venezuela, utilizing a combination of naval power, intelligence gathering, and diplomatic maneuvering. The situation underscores a complex geopolitical dynamic with significant implications for regional security and international relations. The war's shifting strategies, international pressure, and domestic developments. Recent developments surrounding the Ukraine war highlight a multifaceted strategy involving diplomatic pressure, economic sanctions, and domestic political maneuvering. Donald Trump has advocated for China's involvement in mediating a peace settlement, reflecting his desire to end the conflict and maintain a direct channel with Putin. Despite this, the US and UK have taken significant steps to isolate Russia economically, sanctioning its major oil companies and pledging to remove Russian oil and gas from the global market. This initiative, supported by over 20 nations, aims to weaken Russia's financial resources and compel a change in strategy. Simultaneously, domestic developments within the UK demonstrate a determined stance against Russian aggression. 6 men were convicted for their involvement in an arson attack targeting a Ukrainian-owned warehouse supplying aid to Ukraine, showcasing a coordinated effort to disrupt Russian support networks. The attack, ordered by the Wagner Group, involved a complex plot with elements of espionage and kidnapping attempts, revealing a sophisticated campaign of sabotage. Furthermore, international allies are exploring methods to utilize frozen Russian assets, estimated to be worth over $140 billion, to provide financial assistance to Ukraine. Discussions are underway regarding a reparations loan funded by these assets, with a tentative target of a decision by Christmas Eve. However, progress towards a negotiated settlement remains elusive. U.S. President Trump's reluctance to provide Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine has complicated the situation, and Putin has issued warnings regarding the use of such weapons on Russian territory. Despite these challenges, the coalition of the willing, comprised of nations supporting Ukraine, has pledged to bolster Ukraine's air defenses and intensify pressure on Moscow. Ukrainian officials warn of Russia's intent to use winter as a weapon, highlighting the ongoing threat to civilian infrastructure. The overall strategy emphasizes sustained international support and a commitment to disrupting Russia's war machine, while acknowledging the significant obstacles to achieving a lasting peace. The situation remains volatile, with ongoing efforts focused on both military support and economic pressure. Ontario's Advertisement sparks trade dispute between Canada and the United States. Recent developments have escalated into a trade dispute between Canada and the United States, triggered by an advertisement released by the Ontario province of Canada. The advertisement, featuring excerpts from a 1987 radio address by former U.S. President Ronald Reagan, prompted a swift condemnation from U.S. President Donald Trump, leading to the cancellation of trade talks with Canada. The core of the issue lies in Reagan's stance on tariffs, which starkly contrasts with Trump's current approach. Reagan's 1987 speech revealed a reluctant acceptance of tariffs as a necessary measure, primarily in response to Japan's alleged violation of a 1986 trade agreement regarding semiconductor chip dumping. He imposed 100% tariffs on Japanese laptop computers, power tools, and televisions, marking the first major trade retaliation against Japan since World War II. Reagan frequently described tariffs as a necessary evil, emphasizing the importance of fair trade, while cautioning against trade wars. Trump, conversely, has championed tariffs as a tool for economic revitalization, frequently labeling them beautiful, and asserting that trade wars are good and easy to win. This divergence in viewpoints has fueled the dispute, with Trump accusing Ontario of disseminating fake information. The situation highlights a fundamental difference in economic philosophies. Reagan viewed tariffs with skepticism, acknowledging their potential for harm, while Trump has embraced them as a central element of his trade policy. Furthermore, the controversy underscores a historical context. Reagan's administration frequently clashed with Congress over protectionist measures, ultimately vetoing legislation that advocated for tougher trade retaliation. The dispute demonstrates a significant shift in U.S. trade policy, moving away from the cautious approach of the Reagan era towards a more assertive, and arguably more disruptive, stance on international trade. The situation continues to unfold, with potential implications for global trade relations. Thailand's former Queen Sirikit Days, aged 93, Her Majesty Queen Sirikit, the beloved wife of Thailand's King Bhumibol Adulyadej, passed away peacefully at King Chulalongkorn Memorial Hospital on Friday at the age of 93. Following a protracted illness, including a bloodstream infection diagnosed on October 17, she succumbed after medical efforts proved unsuccessful. Since September 7, 2019, a team of doctors had been monitoring her condition and providing ongoing care. The Thai Royal Household Bureau announced her death, initiating a year-long mourning period for the royal family and court officials, decreed by His Majesty King Maha Vajiralongkorn Vajiraklakawa. The funeral procession is scheduled to depart from Chulalongkorn Hospital on Sunday, traversing a 10-kilometer route culminating at the Grand Palace. The public will be able to offer ceremonial water in tribute before the royal portrait at the Sala Sahatai Samakam Pavilion from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. The Bureau of the Royal Household has established a royal funeral committee, chaired by Prime Minister Anutin Charnvirakul, to oversee arrangements. The Queen's remains will be enshrined at Dusit Maha Prasat Throne Hall in the Grand Palace. Prior to her death, Queen Sirikit was a significant figure in Thai society, known for her dedication to rural development, women's empowerment, and the preservation of Thai arts and crafts. She was a style icon during her marriage to King Bhumibol, meeting numerous world leaders including Dwight Eisenhower, Queen Elizabeth II, and Elvis Presley. The initial meeting between the young couple was famously marked by hate at first sight, as recounted by Queen Sirikit in a 1980 documentary. They married on April 28, 1950, and she was elevated to full queen on his coronation day, May 5, 1950. The public has responded with widespread mourning, gathering at King Chulalongkorn Memorial Hospital to pay their respects. The government has urged citizens to wear black or non-vibrant tones for 90 days in her memory. Her Majesty's legacy extends over 70 years of service to Thailand, solidifying her place as a national icon. Gaza patients face critical medical evacuations amidst ceasefire. A growing number of critically ill patients in Gaza are facing imminent death due to the inability to secure timely medical evacuations, despite a fragile ceasefire agreement. Multiple children and adults are suffering from life-threatening conditions, including leukemia, paralysis, brain tumors, and cancer, highlighting the dire humanitarian situation within the besieged territory. Several cases, such as that of 3-year-old Zain Tafesh who died from leukemia, and 8-year-old Sadi Abu Taha who succumbed to stomach cancer, underscore the urgency of the crisis. 2 10-year-old boys, injured by Israeli fire and suffering from paralysis, and another child with a brain tumor, represent a significant portion of the estimated 15,000 patients requiring urgent medical evacuation. The families of these children, like that of Ammar Abu Said, are desperately seeking specialized treatment abroad, but are hampered by Israel's continued closure of the Rafah border crossing with Egypt, a previously utilized route for evacuations. Israel maintains the crossing's closure until Hamas fully fulfills its commitments under the ceasefire deal, specifically the return of deceased hostages' bodies. This has resulted in a severe bottleneck for patient transfers. The World Health Organization, WHO, recently coordinated the first medical convoy since the ceasefire began, transporting 41 patients and 145 carers via Kerem Shalom to hospitals in Jordan. The WHO is advocating for a rapid increase in evacuation numbers and is pushing for access to treatment in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, a measure previously utilized before the conflict. International pressure is mounting, with EU officials and foreign ministers from over 20 countries, including the UK, offering financial contributions, medical personnel, and equipment. The situation remains critically dependent on Israel's willingness to facilitate these evacuations, representing a significant obstacle to saving lives within Gaza. Trump expresses interest in re-engaging with Kim Jong-un. U.S. President Donald Trump has indicated a willingness to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un during his upcoming Asia trip, a move that echoes their previous interactions during Trump's first term. The prospect of a renewed dialogue stems from Trump's long-standing relationship with Kim, characterized by initial taunts followed by 3 face-to-face meetings that ultimately failed to achieve a denuclearization agreement. North Korea's continued development of intercontinental missiles and its status as a nuclear state remain central to the discussion. Trump's itinerary includes visits to Malaysia for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, Asian Summit, and South Korea, where he will participate in the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation (APEC) Forum. A significant element of the trip involves a planned meeting with China's President Xi Jinping, occurring amidst an ongoing trade war fueled by tariffs and disputes over rare earth minerals, a critical component in electronics. South Korean leader Lee Jae-myung has expressed openness to a deal involving North Korea freezing nuclear weapon production, a potential avenue for a Trump-Kim meeting. South Korea's Unification Minister Chung Dong-young suggests a considerable chance of a meeting while Trump is in South Korea. Trump's previous visit to the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, between North and South Korea was initiated via social media. Despite a senior U.S. official stating that a meeting is not currently scheduled, the possibility remains active, reflecting Trump's past engagement with Kim. The trade negotiations with China, currently suspended to prevent triple-digit tariffs, introduce another layer of complexity to the region's geopolitical landscape. The situation regarding rare earth exports from China, accounting for approximately 90% of global refined exports, adds further tension to the already fraught relationship between the two nations. The potential for a Trump-Kim encounter represents a significant, albeit uncertain, development in the ongoing diplomatic efforts surrounding North Korea's nuclear program. U.S. imposes sanctions on Colombian President Petro amidst diplomatic dispute. The United States has imposed sanctions on Colombian President Gustavo Petro and several of his associates, marking a significant escalation in the ongoing diplomatic dispute between the two nations. The sanctions, spearheaded by the U.S. Treasury Department, stem from accusations that Petro's administration has failed to effectively curb drug trafficking and allowed cartels to flourish, leading to a dramatic surge in cocaine production within Colombia. This action represents a rare move, mirroring previous sanctions levied against leaders of Russia, North Korea, and Venezuela. The U.S. contends that cocaine production in Colombia has reached record high levels, flooding the United States and posing a serious public health threat. Treasury Secretary Scott Bennett highlighted this alarming trend, emphasizing the devastating impact of the illicit drug trade. Furthermore, the U.S. is removing Colombia's certification as an ally in the war on drugs, consequently halting access to crucial financial support. In response, Colombia has announced it will cease purchasing weapons from the U.S. The dispute originated from U.S. airstrikes on boats suspected of drug smuggling, which Petro vehemently condemned as an act of tyranny. He argued these attacks were not about controlling the drug trade, but rather a strategy to exert dominance over Colombia and Latin America. Petro's administration is attempting to achieve total peace through negotiations between warring cartels, a complex undertaking hampered by ongoing violence and stalled discussions. Despite Petro's claims that coca cultivation increased during his predecessor Ivan Duque's tenure, the U.S. maintains that the current situation is a direct result of Petro's policies. The U.S. also sanctioned Colombia's Interior Minister Armando Benedetti, as well as Petro's wife and eldest son, barring them from accessing assets and properties within the U.S. Researcher H. Hector Galano notes that cocaine production is at its highest rate in decades. The situation underscores a fundamental disagreement over strategies to combat drug trafficking and highlights the challenges of achieving lasting peace in Colombia. Rajoelina deprived of citizenship following coup in Madagascar. Recent developments in Madagascar have seen the country's former president, Andry Rajoelina, formally stripped of his citizenship by the interim government. This action follows the military takeover of power last week, led by Colonel Michael Rajoelina, which effectively ousted Rajoelina from his position. The decision was formally enacted through an order signed by Prime Minister Salama Rajaelina, utilizing existing Malagasy laws. These laws specifically address individuals who have acquired foreign citizenship, mandating their loss of Malagasy nationality. Rajoelina, aged 51, obtained French citizenship approximately 10 years prior to the coup. This acquisition triggered considerable debate and legal challenges, with calls for his disqualification from the upcoming 2023 presidential election. Despite these objections, Rajoelina proceeded to win the election, a move that further complicated the political landscape. Following the military's seizure of power, Rajoelina promptly fled Madagascar, seeking refuge outside the country. The underlying legal justification for the citizenship revocation rests on a provision within Malagasy law. This law allows for the removal of nationality for individuals who have secured citizenship in another nation. The government's action represents a significant step in consolidating its authority and solidifying its position following the tumultuous events surrounding the coup. The legal ramifications of this action are expected to be closely scrutinized, particularly concerning the legitimacy of the 2023 presidential election and the broader implications for Madagascar's political future. The move signals a decisive attempt by the new regime to establish a clear and legally grounded foundation for governance. The collapse of the China spying case. A key factor was lack of government assessment of China as an enemy. The recent collapse of the prosecution against Christopher Cash and Christopher Berry, accused of spying for China, stemmed primarily from the Deputy National Security Advisor's DNSA refusal to definitively label China an enemy during a potential trial. This reluctance, coupled with a subsequent legal ruling, rendered the case fundamentally weak. Matt Collins, the DNSA, initially stated he could not assert that China posed a risk to the UK's national security, nor could he acknowledge China's opposition to the UK's interests. He clarified that while China engaged in espionage activities, the term enemy required demonstrable evidence beyond a simple assertion. The CPS, led by Director of Public Prosecutions Stephen Parkinson, initially sought to build a case based on the assertion that a jury must be convinced China was an enemy, according to the Official Secrets Act 1911. This required factual evidence demonstrating the extent of the threat, including detailed accounts of Chinese intelligence agency activities. However, Collins' refusal to use the term enemy created a critical legal hurdle. Following the DNSA statement, a court of appeal ruling further complicated matters. The ruling emphasized the need for a factual account of why a state could be considered an enemy under the Act, highlighting the government's previous assessment of Russia. The CPS subsequently requested additional evidence from Collins, but he remained steadfast in his refusal to characterize China as an enemy. The two key meetings between the CPS and Collins ultimately led to the decision to drop the charges. Former Defense and Home Secretary Grant Shapps believes Parkinson was pressured by the Labour government to abandon the case due to a desire for warmer relations with Beijing. Shapps dismissed Parkinson's explanation, stating it was nonsense and factually untrue. The case's collapse underscores the critical role of government assessments and policy declarations in prosecuting national security cases, particularly concerning the definition of an enemy, as defined by the Official Secrets Act. The inability to secure this key element significantly undermined the prosecution's foundation. Chinese drug kingpin extradited after Audacious escape in Jong, also known as Brother Wang, a key figure in the global fentanyl trade, was extradited to the United States following an audacious escape from house arrest in Mexico. Jong, implicated in laundering millions for Mexican and Chinese drug cartels, initially resided in a maximum security Mexican prison before being granted house arrest, a decision criticized by Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. He attempted to flee via a private jet to Cuba and subsequently Russia, utilizing forged documents to secure a commercial flight to Moscow. However, Russian authorities detained him briefly before returning him to Cuba. Cuban security services interrogated Jong for several months before returning him to Mexico and ultimately to the U.S. The operation involved a joint security effort between Mexico, Cuba, and the United States. Jong's arrest highlights the intricate network involved in fentanyl trafficking, linking Chinese chemical companies with Mexican cartels. He was accused of masterminding a vast international ring, sourcing precursor chemicals for fentanyl production, and converting drug funds into cryptocurrency. Despite the significant disruption, security analysts believe Jong's removal will not substantially impact the global drug trade. They argue that alternative individuals within the cartels can readily replace him, citing the example of Jong El Chapo Guzman. The Sheinbaum administration has increased fentanyl seizures and sent convicted cartel members to the U.S. for prosecution, demonstrating a strengthened security relationship with the U.S. The U.S. government expressed satisfaction with the extradition, recognizing Jong's role in Mexican cartel financial operations. This collaboration strengthens the shared security strategy between the two nations. Addressing the ongoing challenge of fentanyl precursor chemicals flowing from China to the Americas remains a complex issue, requiring more than just the apprehension of one individual. The continued flow of these chemicals underscores the need for sustained international cooperation to disrupt the supply chain effectively. Tanzania is enduring albinism attacks ahead of elections. The escalating violence against people with albinism in Tanzania, particularly during election periods, remains a critical issue. Driven by deeply ingrained superstitions, the false belief that body parts bring wealth or political power, these attacks have resulted in widespread trauma and loss of life. Since 2008, over 211 individuals with albinism have been victims, with 79 confirmed deaths, 100 mutilated survivors, and 3 unreported injuries. 2 individuals remain missing, and 27 graves have been desecrated. The attacks frequently intensify as election campaigns begin, reflecting a desperate struggle for influence fueled by unfounded beliefs. The most prominent case is that of Mariam Stafford, who was brutally attacked in 2008, losing both hands and her unborn child. Following the attack, she resettled in Kilimanjaro, where she now creates sweaters. Despite awareness campaigns and government efforts, including a national monument commemorating victims and a crackdown on witchcraft-related killings under Presidents Kikwete and Suluhu Hassan, the violence persists. A recent attack in June 2023 targeted a 2-year-old girl, Asemi Novath, whose remains were discovered after 17 days. 9 suspects have been charged in her murder. Local officials, like District Commissioner Seni Ngaga, are attempting to combat the issue through community engagement, including holding festivals with traditional healers to discourage superstitious beliefs. However, rural areas remain particularly vulnerable. Despite these efforts, Mariam remains deeply affected, avoiding crowds and rarely leaving her home. She expresses skepticism about the electoral process, stating she will not participate, reflecting the pervasive fear and lack of trust that continues to shape her life. The ongoing struggle highlights the complex interplay between traditional beliefs, political ambition, and the vulnerability of a marginalized community in Tanzania. Rohingya refugee crisis deepens amidst funding cuts. The ongoing Rohingya refugee crisis in Bangladesh, particularly within the Cox's Bazar camps, is escalating due to significant reductions in international aid, primarily driven by U.S. budget cuts. Approximately 1.2 million Rohingya refugees, displaced from Myanmar's Rakhine state following military actions and alleged genocide, are facing severe consequences. UNICEF reports an alarming 11% rise in acute malnutrition among children since January, exacerbated by dwindling supplies and reduced food donations. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio defends the cuts as a measure to eliminate bureaucratic inefficiencies and prioritize national interests, but the impact is devastating. A Lancet study predicts 14 million deaths over 5 years resulting from the cuts, while a Boston University impact tracking tool estimates 88 deaths per hour. Despite a recent $60 million aid announcement, the underlying funding gap persists. The situation is dire, with families like Mariam Kadon struggling to provide basic necessities. Kadon's 7-year-old daughter, Estafa, died in February due to aspiration pneumonia and encephalitis, attributed by Kadon to a lack of medical aid. Similar stories emerge across the camps, with families facing restricted access to education, healthcare, and essential food items. The U.S. government's cuts have created a funding cliff, impacting 48 health facilities and 11 primary healthcare centers within the camps. Aid agencies have been forced to reduce staffing and operational capacity, with nearly 5,000 job losses at the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR. The World Food Program faces a $126 million funding gap, and many families are taking out loans to purchase food. Hla Tin, residing in a Sita camp, reports a complete absence of aid since June, further straining resources. The humanitarian need in Myanmar is only 12% funded, highlighting the limited support reaching the source of the crisis. Despite the severity, the U.S. State Department maintains that aid programs are being enhanced and remain accountable to taxpayers. The situation is viewed as a catastrophe in the making, with the reduction in support creating a precarious environment for this vulnerable population. threatening further loss of life and exacerbating the existing humanitarian challenges. Government shutdown impacts expand as funding crisis deepens. A series of escalating events surrounding the ongoing federal government shutdown highlight the deepening crisis and its far-reaching consequences. The White House has implemented several creative, albeit controversial, measures to mitigate the impact, primarily focusing on redirecting tariff revenue to fund critical programs. Initially, $300 million in unspent tariff revenue was allocated to the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children (ABUIC), ensuring its continued operation for several weeks, while another $130 million was provided to cover military service members' salaries during the shutdown. This donation, originating from an anonymous friend of the president, has raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest and legal ramifications, particularly regarding adherence to the Anti-Efficiency Act. Meanwhile, the shutdown is causing significant hardship for federal employees, with nearly 2,600 furloughed USDA workers already filing for unemployment benefits, a number expected to rise sharply as more workers experience delayed payments. The process of receiving these benefits is complicated by bureaucratic delays, verification issues, and the potential for repayment once the shutdown ends. Several states are taking steps to streamline the process, offering webinars and resources to assist affected employees. The Pentagon's decision to accept the anonymous donation has drawn criticism from legal experts and lawmakers, who question the legality of using private funds to offset a lapse in appropriations. The situation underscores the broader stalemate between the White House and Congress over funding for the government. Furthermore, the shutdown is impacting essential services, including air traffic control, with staffing shortages reported at several airports. The FAA is grappling with reduced air traffic controller availability, leading to potential delays. The USDA's decision not to utilize its $6 billion contingency fund for SNAP benefits next month, despite its availability, reflects the administration's stance and further exacerbates the food assistance crisis for approximately 42 million Americans. Democratic lawmakers are urging the administration to reconsider its position and utilize the contingency fund, arguing it is legally obligated to do so. The ongoing shutdown demonstrates a critical impasse in government funding, creating significant challenges for federal employees, vulnerable populations, and the nation's infrastructure. The situation remains fluid and dependent on congressional action to resolve the funding dispute. Kamala Harris hints at another presidential run. "I am not done." Kamala Harris has signaled her potential intention to run for president again, most notably in an interview with the BBC and a subsequent CNN report. She stated she possibly would be president one day and expressed confidence in a future female presidency, asserting her grandnieces would witness it. This comes after her 2024 defeat to Donald Trump and reflects a continued consideration of her political future. Harris emphasized she has not made a final decision, but remains an active player in U.S. politics, dismissing polls as irrelevant to her decision-making process. She acknowledged a late start to her 2024 campaign as a contributing factor to her defeat, regretting a lack of time to address key issues like housing and childcare. During the BBC interview, Harris sharply criticized Donald Trump, accusing him of weaponizing the Department of Justice and citing the suspension of Jimmy Kimmel as evidence of his authoritarian tendencies. She also condemned business leaders for their perceived capitulation to his demands. Addressing concerns about her position within the Democratic Party, Harris highlighted the need to connect with working people, acknowledging a shift away from that demographic within the party. She stated she pays little attention to polls, asserting that she would not have run for office if she had listened to them. The interview revealed Harris's willingness to consider another presidential bid, particularly given the timeline. She acknowledged a traumatic campaign experience, describing it as traumatic. Her comments underscore a potential strategy for 2028, potentially leveraging the perceived failure of Biden's strategy and the continued concerns surrounding Trump's actions. Harris's stance represents a significant move in the ongoing debate about the future of the Democratic Party and the viability of a second presidential run. The interview focused on her belief that she is not done and continues to view herself as an active participant in American politics. Grover Cleveland, a historical parallel in domestic troop deployments. During the late 19th century, President Grover Cleveland's response to anti-Chinese riots in Washington state provides a stark historical contrast to the contemporary actions of President Donald Trump. Cleveland's deployment of U.S. troops in 1885 and 1886 to Tacoma and Seattle, following the Rock Springs Massacre, aimed to quell escalating violence against Chinese immigrants, a direct response to vigilante attacks fueled by labor competition fears. This action stemmed from a request by Chinese merchants and the territorial governor, Worsens Ceasefire, seeking protection from expulsion. The situation differed significantly from Trump's current use of troops, primarily focused on facilitating mass deportations, particularly in Los Angeles. Cleveland's intervention was a proactive measure to safeguard a vulnerable minority group facing imminent expulsion and potential further violence. While hundreds of Chinese immigrants were ultimately driven out of Seattle during the spring of 1886, the presence of U.S. soldiers prevented a complete escalation of the conflict. Following the Rock Springs massacre, anti-Chinese sentiment led to violent confrontations, prompting Cleveland to send troops to maintain order and protect Chinese survivors. The Chinese population dispersed, with approximately 800 individuals fleeing Tacoma and over 200 departing Seattle under duress. Many sought refuge in cities like Portland, San Francisco, and the eastern states, while some emigrated to Canada or China. Historically, U.S. immigration law had systematically discriminated against Chinese immigrants, beginning with the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which explicitly rejected Chinese immigrants based on race and class. While restrictions existed on European immigrants regarding poverty or contract labor, these were significantly less impactful than the Chinese Exclusion Act. This discriminatory legislation had a profound and lasting effect on the Chinese American community, separating families and hindering generations. The Chinese Exclusion Act remained in effect until 1943, when it was formally repealed, though discriminatory immigration laws persisted until the 1965 Immigration Act.